This is Tom Colley for Through the Ropes Boxing. Absolutely delighted to be joined with Frank Gilfeather, boxing inspiration, journalist, former amateur boxing champion. Frank, how are you?
I'm fine, and it's great to speak to you, Tom, and thank you for inviting me on the podcast.
Not at all, Frank. Thank you very much for coming on. So, Frank, obviously, recent times we've seen you sort of exploded onto the scene on social media. I think you got over 100,000 followers on TikTok, 100,000 followers on Instagram now. Talk me through how that's sort of come around. I know you've obviously been around boxing for many, many years, but now to suddenly have had this prominence on social media, how's that come around for you?
Well, about 18 months ago, I still keep training 2 or 3 times a week, try to get 3 times a week. And the gym I was training at, the guy who owns it, his son, Gregor McPherson, a real Scottish name, had just turned pro. He was 18. And I knew him as a kid at another boxing club, and I could see that he had promise. So he turned pro, and he's a lightweight. And I was in the ring one day working with him on a Sunday morning, just pointing out little kind of things that I thought he needed to improve on. I was unaware that my son, who had also been training, was filming this on his phone. And he said, "I'm going to put this up on TikTok." And I went, "Okay, fine, TikTok." I'd heard about TikTok, but I'd never actually experienced it. So he put it on TikTok. That was 18 months ago. And suddenly these things began to gather pace. And he said, "You need to do more boxing tutorials. You need to show this." And so I started doing that, and I enjoy it. And then before we know where we are today, I think, as we're speaking on TikTok, I'm up nearly 190,000 followers. Now, it just kind of gathered momentum, and the comments. That's the thing that's very encouraging for me, because people are saying, "Wow, partly because of my age. I just turned 78, and I can still do it. I can still demonstrate." Partly because of that, but partly because I felt there was something missing in boxing coaching. I was going onto social media and watching people who claim to be boxing coaches, and I thought, "You're just teaching the wrong thing here." And you look at the comments, and you've got presumably young kids mainly on social media, and actually mainly on TikTok, who are saying to these coaches, "Wow, this is brilliant." And it's not. It's rubbish. And so a couple of times I had to call them out and say, "No, you've got to get back to proper boxing training and coaching." So that's how it went. And then the Instagram followed. Honest to God, about 5 weeks ago, we just kind of, Instagram, we thought, "That's a tough nut to crack, but we'll post anyway." And we'd done a few posts. And about 5 weeks ago, or maybe even less, I had 170 followers. And now I've got today 106,000. So it's just gone through the roof. And can I just say, Colin, that while we've been speaking, I've had texts coming through to say that David Benavides, Ken Rideout, Josh Taylor, Paul Weir, who's a former world light flyweight champion, Alex Arthur, another Scot who was a world champion, they're all following me now, apart from so many celebrities like Gary Oldman and Tony Parsons, the author, and another guy who's just come in, David Segura. Does that mean anything to you? Mega comedian in America.
Okay.
So here we are. This is crazy for an old guy like me.
And how are you finding it, Frank? Have you started being noticed? Where you live in Scotland, and people on the streets.
Where I live in Scotland, yeah. Wait, actually, it's an interesting point, because where I live in Scotland, I was a TV presenter and reporter for many, many years. And that was fine. Everybody kind of in the area would recognize you and so on. But since I moved out of TV and retired from that, well, although I was working for Sky Sports until, I still do from time to time, reporting football. Now I'm getting kids, 16, 17, 18-year-olds saying, "What? We we follow you on TikTok," and it's kind of bizarre because the kind of the demographic has changed. So I used to go, middle-aged and elderly
Mm.
people would say, "Oh, I watch you on the TV," and things like, because I used to present the nightly news program here in my area, and now it's different. It's
Mm.
all about kids who are on social media.
And how did you get into boxing, Frank? Back in your younger days, I know you're an amateur champion yourself. How did you find yourself entering the sport?
Well, my dad ran a boxing club. He started a boxing club in Dundee, where I originally come from, in an area called Lochee. Now, what you remember is, this was after the war, and then when I was about 4, I started going along to the boxing club. But my dad would take me. And I had 2 older brothers. One's 9 years older and one 11 years older. And they boxed. And the eldest one was a British and Scottish youth champion when he was 14, 15. But then when he got a wee bit older, he gave it up. And my other brother, Dennis, he went on to box for Scotland and he became the Scottish champion and so on, many district titles, that kind of stuff. So I was going along to the boxing club from the age of 4. So I was kind of soaking it in like a
Yeah.
sponge. And then I started boxing competitively. And over the years, I just built up and up and up. And I went on to win titles, boxed at the Royal Albert Hall twice against England, boxed all over Europe for Scotland. And then at the age of, before I was 22, I thought, right, that's me finished. I've done it.
Yeah.
Move on. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then that's obviously led you in now. And how long have you been coaching for, Frank? Seen you online doing
Well,
a
the
lot.
thing is, you know how this happened? I still try, because of my, new family, 4 kids, heavy work schedule and TV and then newspapers, doing news and sport, mainly football. The boxing took a back seat. And then, I don't know, it was about 15 or 20 years ago, I thought I really need to get back to the club and start training. So I joined a club locally, and we were still open way up. So I was there for about 15 years. And then only latterly, well, at my own instigation, there were kids coming at the club whom I felt weren't being looked after. I felt they were just, it was just, these are kids. Let them go on with it. They'll enjoy it. They're having fun. But they wanted to learn. And so I took on the mantle of, saying, well, this is how you box. Basic things that coaches don't tell you. I mean, I've got a thing about coaches. There are lots of coaches out there who are unqualified. When I say unqualified, I don't mean that they haven't ticked all the boxes and filled in the forms for England boxing or boxing Scotland. There's lots of them around. But what I mean is that they don't have a feel for boxing, and they've never experienced being in a ring. And that's a big deal. When you go into the ring and really experience being in there and getting thumped in the face, that's a whole new story. So basic things. How do you throw a straight left? How do you throw a jab? How do you throw a right cross? How do you basic things like, I asked a kid one night, I thought, right, let's me try an experiment. This 8-year-old boy, and his face would light up because I would take him in the ring and get on my knees and allow him to batter the life out of me. And I said to him one night, take off your boxing gloves and let me see how your hands are, how you close your hands. And he had his hands like, I don't know if you can see that. He had his hands with the thumbs sticking out the top. And I thought, well, nobody's actually told you that you close your hands, right? Like that. Otherwise, you'll stave your thumb and so on. So there was little things like that. And I felt there's a kind of disconnect here in coaching where people assume things that you'll know how to do it, coaches, and they go around the punch back and they're just kind of adding encouragement rather than stopping the boxer and saying, you're doing this wrong or you're doing that right. So latterly at this boxing club I was in, I found myself doing that. And then they said to me, right, you need to be a registered coach. And I said, no, I don't. I'm just happy coaching in a club. I don't want to be in anybody's corner. I don't want to have to be committed to all that. I like 3 times a week coaching young people. And they said, no, fill out the forms. Now, they got me the forms to be a registered coach for Boxing Scotland. And it was laughable. You can get somebody off the street to tick the boxes. They ask you these questions. And then apparently you go to a 2-hour coaching session given by a coach. And now you're a registered coach. So I said, no, I won't do any of that. But I was happy doing my coaching till I left that club and I went to start to get my fitness back again because I was losing out on my training to coach. And this is when this thing came about, social media stuff. Yeah.
And just touching on your fitness, Frank, I don't mind me saying, at 78 years old, I think you've put that on your social media, so I'm sure you don't mind people know. Incredible, really, that you're still able to do what you can do. I've seen you on the bags.
Thank you.
What is the secret, Frank? Is there a secret to still having that mobility and ability to hit the bag like that at your age?
I've thought about this. You know what? On social media, I get questions on that kind of stuff every day. What do you eat? What's your diet? What's the secret? I don't know. My dad lived till he was 6 weeks before his 99th birthday. So it's in the genes. And I've never been one for fizzy drinks. I've never been one for kind of sweet stuff. You know, I'm not discounting any of that stuff. But I've never been one of these guys that thinks, I must get a chocolate bar, I must get a fizzy drink off the shelf. I never drink that stuff. I never, if I take a bit of chocolate, it's a tiny bit. Not because I'm trying to be some kind of guru, fitness guru, or member of the food police or anything like that. It's just the way I am. And then over the years, I mean, I'm lucky because my wife cooks fresh stuff for me every day, in my one main meal a day, which is in the evening. And I think this is key. So I tend to eat pasta, loads and loads of vegetables. What I found in the last even 3 years is that I'm veering more towards vegetarian stuff.
Yeah.
Although at the same time, I'm not discounting. I tend never to eat red meat. Not because it's bad for you or anything like that, just because I'm not a big fan. I like chicken, I like duck, I like lamb, but lots of vegetables. So even in the morning, Tom, I have toast and tea and a banana. And then for lunch, I may have a snack, I may have a sandwich. But generally speaking, I have fresh fruit and yogurt. And then my one meal of the day is always before 6 o'clock in the evening, usually about 5 o'clock. And then I fast until next morning's breakfast. It works for me. Now, it's hard for me to say to people, that's the way you should do it. I would never dream of saying that. What I'm saying is it works for me. It might work for you. I'm saying to people, it might, just try it. And what you do is, I've learned, is you actually train your body, train your stomach to accept that that's what your intake will be on a daily basis. But I think it's basically about the don'ts rather than the do's. Don't take fizzy drinks. Don't be snacking on, crisps and all the other stuffs that you get. Don't be doing any of that. Don't be overdosing on chocolate bars or anything like that. And I think that way, you keep it in check.
Interesting, Frank. Interesting. I'm sure a lot of people would be interested to hear you talk about that. And just moving on as well, then, Frank, I wanted to just get your opinion or your advice. So, if there was young amateur boxer watching this right now, what piece of advice would you give to them just starting out?
Well, I think the key piece of advice is to think about boxing rather than fighting. Think about the science of boxing. Think about the skill. You see lots of boxers, young boxers, who just want to get in there and fight. I'll give you an example. There was a kid at the old boxing club I used to be in who's very, very shy. A much bigger boy than all his peers for his age. And he used to wait outside the club, and I would come in and he'd be standing with his bike. He cycled miles to get there. And his name was Casper. And he's a lovely kid, very shy. Could hardly get him to speak. But I coached him over a long time, and he grew in confidence. Now, I wouldn't say he grew in skill. It was hard for him. But, everybody gets it. But that wasn't the important thing. The important thing for me was keeping fit and healthy and doing something meaningful. And actually, this is the key thing, Tom. He was belonging to something that hadn't previously been in his life.
Yeah.
A boxing club. He would have the T-shirt, he would have the tracksuit, all that. He was part of that scene, and he loved that. Now, he's only one example. However, as the years passed and he grew in confidence and he got better, he improved. Suddenly, a guy who was there, a coach, who actually wasn't a coach, he was a dad who came along with his son. But the guy around the club said, would you give us a hand looking after the kids? Because there were so many kids. So this guy did it. He takes this boy and he changes him completely. And he gave him, in effect, a peekaboo style, right? And I watched him one night sparring, and the peekaboo style did nothing for him because the guy he was sparring with put every punch through there, right? And I went up to him and I said, do you realize that you are taking punch after punch because of that style that you've adopted? He has told you you should adopt. And he said, yeah. I said, there's a way to stop that, don't you? And he went, yeah, what do you mean? I said, simple. That's the door. Close it. Close the door. Now, I'm not saying you put your hands there, but you should change the way you stand. And I'm a big believer of the open backhand to catch and parry. But by then, he kind of got stuck in his ways, and he was taking punches. And it's the one thing I hate. I hate to see youngsters taking punches. It's not very gratifying for me to see that in a boxer. So, in answer to your question, think of the skill, think of the defense. Now, that's the thing you see in a lot of boxers, where the defense is not really the front of their mind. In fact, it's not in their thinking at all for many people. They take so many punches, and you think, hang on, when are you going to realize that you can avoid these punches? And worse than that, when is your coach, when you go back to the corner, what is he going to say to you? You have to change. You have to stop these punches getting through. So don't take punches. Obviously, you're going to be hit, right, at some point. But you've got to minimize that danger. And the key thing is, think about the skill. Think about you're making your opponent make mistakes and then capitalizing on that, counter punching and so on. Think about opening him up with different punches. That's why the jab is the most important punch. It opens up doors for you.
Thank you, Frank. And just bringing it back to yourself for a moment before I go on to ask you a little bit about the boxing landscape in the professional division at the moment. Just for those watching and those that have seen your TikToks, like I say, keep bringing it back to that and the shape that you're in and the training that you still do. What does a week of training look like for Frank Gilfeather? What sort of routine do you have, and how frequently are you still training, and how intensely?
Well, I've never changed really. I'm kind of stuck in my ways, and I watch boxers doing different things nowadays in this modern era, and that's fine stuff. But one thing we never did, in fact, I had a question from a guy yesterday on TikTok saying, how heavy should the weights be that I use? And I hold up my hand in horror. And I said, never lift heavy weights. You know, the dumbbells in your hand were about as heavy as we ever did. But I think as soon as you start lifting heavy weights, you turn into a bodybuilder. And your maneuverability, your rhythm, your kind of style, it is rigid because of the building of that muscle. So what I do is simple. 3 rounds of skipping, right? 3-minute rounds, depending on if you can manage 3 minutes. If you can't, do 2 minutes. Right. Nothing's set in stone. You do everything to accommodate what your body will allow and no more. Right. The next time you try a bit longer. Next time you get there, eventually you get there. There is no rush to reach that goal, especially if you're just coming to the gym to keep fit. So I do 3 minutes skipping, 3 threes of shadow boxing. And that's just for movement, for rhythm, for little, footwork is important. And so all of that stuff, it's just for that. You're not looking to kill yourself at shadow boxing. It's all about the movement. And then I would do 3-minute rounds on a punch bag, different bags. Sometimes I used to do floor to ceiling when I was good at that, when my hand-eye coordination was better. And then I would finish off, not now, but I would normally finish when I was boxing. I would finish off with anything up to 6 rounds sparring with different sparring partners. I'd love to get into the ring now, but I'm sure that Healthy Aged would have a petition to Downing Street to prevent me from doing that. So I think so. I just finish off with a series of exercises standing, to get my body, my shoulders, my arms, and then tummy muscle exercises on the floor, all that stuff, and finish off with that. And that does me. So that works for me. Now, everybody's going to be different, and every coach is going to have different ideas on what their boxer should be doing. But that does for me, and it's always done for me, and I stand by that. I'm happy with that.
Fantastic, Frank. And I reckon Muhammad Ali never lifted a single weight. And yeah, no doubt that the most important thing.
Well, when I grew up, there were no weights on none of these machines, the super duper machines where, guys are pulling and pushing and all that kind of stuff to build muscle. Now, I'm not giving an opinion on that simply because somebody who's more of an expert about these things might come and say, well, you're totally wrong. What I'm saying is, in my day, no boxer that I ever came across lifted weights or pulled. These things just didn't exist. All these kind of contraptions that you get in a modern gym these days, they didn't exist. Everything was about speed, power, skill. These are the 3 basic pillars of boxing for me. The rest is just icing, and fluff and all the stuff that doesn't really matter.
So, Frank, just moving on, just wanted to get your opinion on sort of the wider landscape of the professional division at the moment. You've seen the recent card in Saudi Arabia. They reckon it's one of the best cards they've ever put on. I don't know if you watched that. I bet you did. Can I get your thoughts on some of those fights, particularly Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker, Anthony Joshua versus Wallin? What did you make of those fights?
Well, listen, I've got a thing about the heavyweight division, right? I think it's so poor. And I'm trying to compare it with previous years. And again, everything's changed, right? When I was growing up as a kid, Rocky Marciano, before that, Joe Louis, right? Wonderful boxers. I mean, Marciano was probably, in my view, underrated. And if you look back at some of Marciano's fights, the devastation of this guy was tremendous. And he had 49 fights undefeated. Yeah. So then you go forward. Now, I might be wrong, but the heavyweight division in those days, in terms of skill, in terms of what it meant, was more important, but it was also better. And the reason for that probably was because these heavyweights are all about 13 and a half stone or 14 stone at the most, right?
Yeah.
Before they became monsters and giants, And suddenly, kind of over a year after Mike Tyson, when you think of Mike Tyson, what was he, about 5'10", 5'10 and a half? Just short.
Mm.
Anyway, people always bring up Tyson's name in the comments on my on TikTok and so on. And he's got a huge fan base still. And they go on about how I rarely have anything good to say about peekaboo style. I think the peekaboo style was almost invented by Cus D'Amato, Tyson's coach. And before that, he was the coach for Floyd Patterson, who had the same style. And I think he invented it almost because these were short heavyweights. And their jab, like when you ever see Tyson throw a jab, Tyson goes in for the kill from the first bell. Cool. And he had to adopt that style where he's got the hands up and the head moving constantly. So that's a skill. It's like Canelo. Canelo's constant head movement means that he's a terrific defense boxer. So that he punches and moves. And when the guy comes from, the head's not there. The chin's not there. Or they scruff his head or his ears or whatever. They can't get a clean hit. So Tyson is brilliant at that. Tyson's great thing was, because he was short, in the main, if you look back, some of, almost all of Tyson's fights were against huge guys compared with him. So he had to get close. He couldn't stand off and jab because he didn't have the reach. So he had to get close, and through that peekaboo style, he would allow himself to get into the position to throw the hooks. And that's what did the damage for most of his opponents, until the bigger guys who were attuned to what he was doing began to take the right tactics in as much as being able to counter him. If you look at some of the uppercuts Tyson was hit with in the later stages of his career, they began to say, "All right, this is how you fight this guy." So, the heavyweight division just now, my goodness me, I despair. I mean, when you think of Francis Ngannou, one fight against a world champion who is 6'9" and 20 stone, and therefore you need a ladder and you need him to stand still to hit him. And that's his great talent, if you like, Tyson Fury. Because it's virtually impossible to catch him on the chin. Ngannou caught him high on the head, and I think Fury was shocked. I don't think he was kind of fully into that fight. He wasn't himself.
No.
But what I'm saying is there's a paucity of top heavyweight, skillful fighters. Tyson Fury, as you know, his tactics are great. He punches you once or twice and then he grabs, right? Because these big guys can rarely throw fantastic combinations. You never see them going bang, 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 3, 4, 5 punches. They can't. It's just so bulky. And for that reason, I never understand why people buy into that type of boxing. I would much rather watch somebody like Ngai, the Japanese guy, or Terence Crawford, or some of the great middleweights and so on. Much better. Canelo. Imagine watching these guys rather than big, bulking, heavy brutes who have very limited boxing ability, but who can box within their physical limitations. And I think that's the key. That's how they get by.
I think it's interesting. The heavyweights that have passed, the greats like Louis and Marciano, like you mentioned, they'd almost be cruiserweights now in today's era. And I think the heavies now it's probably not so much they don't have the ability. It's probably more the fact that they're so heavy that it's quite hard to box and move. Maybe someone in a lower weight division. So on that, Frank, as well. So I just wanted to get your opinion. Who is if you had to say your all-time favourite boxer, who would that be?
Well, have to be. I never hesitate when I'm asked this question. Sugar Ray Robinson. And if you ask throughout the years, throughout the eras of boxing, have you asked the great experts that same question, they would come up with this answer. Now, there's a reason for that. If you watch Sugar Ray, I mean, he had everything, right? He could fight a boxer, box a fighter. He had a brilliant boxing brain. But more than that, he had this fantastic rhythm, and he could read a fighter instantly. And if he didn't read the fighter instantly and he lost, he made sure that the next time his game plan was in place. For example, he won the middleweight title 5 times, right? Which means he lost it 4 times because he didn't get it right on the night. But this guy would have been the welterweight, middleweight. He'd already held the welterweight. He won the middleweight. He would have been the light heavyweight champion when he fought Joey Maxim for the light heavyweight title in New York in the 50s. And it was New York's hottest night for like centuries since records began. People were fainting all over the place. Robinson was miles ahead. And in the end of the 13th round, he couldn't get off his stool because he was exhausted. He lost so much kind of liquid moisture from his body. He couldn't go on. And so Sugar Ray Robinson, I think I just love the kind of movement of that guy and his style, and he's just a genius. And before you ask it, I trained with him.
Wow.
Yeah. I used to be the chief sparring partner for a guy called Walter McGowan, who was from Hamilton in Scotland, and he won the World Flyweight Championship. He was a brilliant fighter. And his dad, he called himself Joe Gans. That's another story about his name. He discovered me, if you like, when I was 15. I was boxing at an amateur tournament, and McGowan had turned professional, and he'd come through with 2 or 3 sparring partners, and he was doing exhibition sparring on the bill that night. And I boxed, and when I came out the ring, and I was in the changing room, McGowan's father, who was also his manager, came up to me and said, "Would you like to give Walter a couple of rounds later?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I did it. So I was 15, and it went well for me. And at that time I was bantamweight, right? So I was about a stone heavier than McGowan. No, it's half a stone, I beg your pardon. So in the changing room after it, McGowan's father said to me, "Look, I'd like you to come through to our gym in Hamilton, which is about 12 miles south of Glasgow, and train regularly and spar with Walter." Well, I did that for several years. And I realized that that's the reason. One of the reasons I carried on with that is because Joe Gans wanted me to become his second boxer in his stable, which I resisted. Anyway, Gans said to me one day, there was a big show coming up in Paisley, I think, 5,000 people, on which McGowan was featuring. And Gans said to me, "Next Sunday when you come down, don't come to the gym, come to St. Cuthbert's Church Hall, because we'll be training there." I thought, okay, why is that? He said, "Never mind, just come there." So I went down, and the church hall was decked out with the punch bags and a ring, a full-sized ring, everything. And there was about 4 or 5 of us invited to be there. And we were putting on our wraps, or we just called them bandages in those days. And when the door opened, and who walked in? Sugar Ray Robinson, right? And he was there because on that same bill, he was boxing the British middleweight champion, a guy called Mick Leahy, who was an Irishman from Coventry. on that bill, and he came over to me, and I was 18 at the time, I think, 1964, and he said, "Hi, I'm Ray Roberts." Yeah, you are. And what's your name? And I said, "Right, Frankie." He used to call me in those days. Frankie Gilfeather. Yeah, Frank. What do you weigh? What do you? And he spoke for a couple of minutes. And I kind of, I could hardly speak. This was my hero.
Yeah.
It was like a John Lennon fan.
Yeah.
You know, having a cup of tea with Lennon, or an Elvis fan having a dinner with Elvis Presley. It was that kind of moment. And I went, wow. And he was boxing Mick Lee. Mick Lee beat him, but Mick Lee wasn't in his league, really, because Robinson was 43 at the time. And he was going around Europe. He boxed, I'm trying to get this right. In about 6 weeks, he had, I think, 9 or 10 contests.
He used to fight every week, and he went about 120 before he lost, didn't he?
Yeah. You're right.
And then 5 fights with LaMotta.
Sorry?
5 fights with Jake LaMotta as well. Was it?
Yeah. That's right. I mean, can you imagine that? These guys are... But the reason he was on this European tour is because the American taxman was chasing for money. So he was having to do all this stuff. But I think about a year later, he was finished. He finished his career. Wonderful, wonderful career. Fabulous.
Frank, I'm sure we could talk all evening, but we've got about 1.5 minutes until my Zoom cuts us off.
Let me just say one thing about me.
To the premium because we've got a limited time. So yeah, go ahead, Frank.
Well, okay, just one thing. One of the bugbears I have is that all the kids nowadays wear sparring gloves on the punch bag, right? And which means that the thumb, and I've been through this so often, the thumb is attached to the main part of the hand by a little piece of elastic, right? I go back to the old bag mitts, and I've brought out my own bag mitts so that people can fold their hand properly and punch properly. They're called the noble art. That's the plug, Tom. That's all I need to say. But have you got another question?
Brilliant. The noble art. We've got 37 seconds. Frank, who's going to win the English Premier League this year?
Oh, do you know what? I'd like to see Liverpool do it. Why? Who do you support?
Chelsea.
Chelsea, do you? Well, I don't think you've got a chance to tell you. I'd like to see Liverpool. I love the ethos of Liverpool, and I love Jurgen Klopp. I think what he's done is fantastic.
Frank Gilfeather, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on Through the Ropes Boxing.
Many thanks, Tom.
Take care, Frank.